All right. Parents ought to be really excited. School started Friday. That means tomorrow is a full week of school. Yay! Life is good. I'm Brent. I'm the lead pastor here, and I'm real excited that you're here today. We're kicking off a brand new series, and as you can see from the screen, it's called Seduced. Doesn't that seem a little scandalous right there? Seduced with the apple. Ooh. It's going to be a good series because for 3 Sundays, we're going to be looking at what are some areas, 3 main areas where we feel like that the Bible teaches that we as humans are just most open and susceptible to seduction. It's the greatest pulls, the greatest temptations, the greatest challenges sometimes that seem to want to pull us off track and derail us in our faith. And hopefully along the way, we're going to find some very practical steps that we can give you, some things that maybe you can implement in your life, things you can do that will help you be able to resist that urge, resist the seduction that we find coming at us sometimes from all angles. The basis for this series is actually verses found in 1 John chapter 2. 1 John, written traditionally seen by the apostle or the disciple John, who was one of Jesus' followers. And in 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, we read this. It says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world." Now, let me just say this, that when it says do not love the world, he's not saying we hate everybody outside. We hate the trappings of the world, the things that derail our faith. We love the people of the world. In fact, we're supposed to, because in John 3:16, it tells us God loved the world. So these things are not in conflict, but it's setting up something we need to be very aware of. It says, "If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life come not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever." Those 3 things right there we see, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Those are kind of the basis for these 3 areas of seduction that we want to look at. The lust of the flesh. Those are those internal desires that we have or that we struggle with. Those things that, anybody, am I alone in this, or does anybody else kind of give me a head nod? Yep, I know what you're talking about. No, Garrett, you lie. The lust of the eyes. See, you don't know who I'm going to call out here, so you better be careful. The lust of the eyes, what is that? Those are the things we see. Those are the things outside of us that allure to us, that pull us and draw us in and tempt us. And then the pride of life is just simply that understanding that, look at me. I've done this. I'm really that great. And it's kind of an empty boasting, because we all know that basically everything we have, everything we are, comes from God. And so when we get to the place where we're boasting about it, we know we're in a really bad position. And lust, of course, is just obviously this urge, this desire typically towards impure things. And so that's what we want to be looking at over the next coming weeks. Talking about this may make us a little bit uncomfortable. It should, honestly, because nobody likes to admit areas where we may be weak or areas we may need to work on. But one of the reasons I believe we need to look at this is because of what John has said here in this letter. When he writes that there's the love of the world and then there's the love of God, what he's telling us is that there is really a dividing line that exists, and that we can't, as much as we want to straddle that line and be pulled in both directions. He's saying it's impossible for us as humans to do. As good at multitasking as we may be, as good at keeping balls and juggling and keeping the balls in the air we may be, it's a reminder that says you're not that good. You can't do this. You can't say, oh, I'm a Christian today, and oh, I'm following Jesus now, and oh, I'm following the things of the world. There is a line where it says, okay, look, you have to choose. You're not capable as a human of just straddling that line. And so it's important for us to understand that we will love one and not the other. We will either love God or love the things that the world offers. And if we're really truly honest, I think all of us would have to admit there are times in our lives where we feel that pull, that tug to elevate ourselves, to lift ourselves up, especially when we begin comparing ourselves to others. Anybody gone to a high school reunion? I was only in my high school for 2 years, so I didn't really know anybody, so I have no interest in ever going back because I just didn't know them. But I know some people, if you grew up with the same people, you went to the same high school reunion's a big deal. Why do you go back? You go back to see how your friends are doing, right? And you kind of want to compare yourself to see, yep, glad I didn't end up with you, right? I mean, let's just be real. Yep, broke up with you, positive thing. Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, we want it, but we do kind of this comparison thing to kind of say, how have I done? Am I better than you? Am I above you? And I mean, let's just be honest. That's an appeal for all of us, right? We all struggle with that. I mean, school started Friday, you know? Moms, dads, how many of you, when you dropped your kids off at school, did you look and you go, oh my goodness, they're wearing new clothes, and my kids are wearing stuff they had last year. And let's just talk about those parents that go buy those expensive school supplies. I hate you. Buy the cheap stuff. Don't send your kid to school with the $35 3-ring binder. Get the $5 Walmart special just like the Clarks, okay? I mean, but you know it's a temptation because you look, and even, do you remember going to school? Some of you are so old you probably don't, but no, I'm just kidding. I'm only teasing. I was thinking, I can't say who I'm thinking about because they'd really be offended, and it wasn't anybody old at all. So, but if you think about when you were going to school, anybody lose sleep the night before? What were you worried about? What were you worried about? You were worried about how you were going to dress and the supplies you would carry and the friends you would have. You were worried about one thing. You were worried about your status. You were worried about how other people were going to view you, whether you were going to be seen good or bad, be in with the friends or out, because the summer had happened and things could have changed, and sometimes it often did change. And you're left there wondering, where am I going to fit in? And really, that's what I want us to look at today, is that whole idea of how we are seduced by status. And as I thought about this, my mind immediately went to social media. Because isn't social media just our absolute enemy when it comes to this? I mean, even all the platforms have what? Update your status, right? You're supposed to put a status in there. And I actually looked for a definition. I thought, what is the definition of a Facebook status? And it says this: a status is usually short and generally gives information without going into much detail. And don't we like that? Because we can make anything look really pretty on Facebook. We can make our lives look amazing when it's absolutely falling apart. In fact, I went and I thought, there's a website and it's like, hey, here's what the Instagram photo looks like, but here's reality. I thought I would share some of these with you today, okay? So let's look at some of these. These are my favorite. Look at this beautiful woman. Isn't that an incredible photo? But look at the reality of this photo. That does not look comfortable. I mean, you got to really want that shot to stand there like that. All right, let's go to the next one. Oh, who doesn't want to be in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris? But let's look at reality. Oh, just standing in front of a poster. You're welcome. You now know how to go to Paris. Let's look at the next one. Oh, beautiful vintage street scene with old cars and all that. Well, is that reality? Nope. It's old toys sitting on a table set up with a camera and perspective. Impressed, aren't you? You're like, wow, how did somebody do that? Let's go to the next one. This is one of my favorites. This guy's obviously very proud of the new gold chain that he has purchased, except is it really a gold chain? No, it's his mother's purse wrapped around his neck. Awesome. Awesome. Way to go. So if you need to impress your friends, go check your mother's purses and see. There might just be a handle there for you. Let's look at the next one. Oh, what a romantic photo. I mean, who doesn't want this on your Facebook or Instagram, right? But let's look what's required to get this photo. That is commitment. Anybody got a friend like that? That's Ryan, I need your help after church. I got a photo I want to take. That's just crazy, just to get that photo. Okay, this is the last one. Can you see this? I don't know if you can see the detail, but the wedding couple there, they're beautiful, and there's kind of a mist. You guys see that? There's a mist going across them. What a magical moment until you see the real picture. I don't even have to comment on that one. That is amazing. Now, some of you just got ideas, I know, and you're thinking, oh, I got to write these down so I can update my Facebook this afternoon. But isn't this the epitome of what social media does to us? It convinces us that how we look in the eyes of the world is everything. And so we need to pay attention. We feel like we have to pay attention and put up a great status and put up a great photo, when in reality, most of the time you feel like your hair is a mess, your kids are running wild, you can't keep it together, and just life is falling apart. But we don't want to put that on Facebook, because then people wouldn't be impressed with our statuses. So all of these things, they pull and they tug at us to elevate ourselves so that others know it. And we are seduced by status. And that's what I want us to look at today. It can appear in various forms. I've mentioned a few, but in the 1980s, there was this movie called Wall Street. Anybody remember that? And all of it was about this cutthroat business on Wall Street where you did anything and everything you could to drive to get to the top of your field. And that's one of the areas where we're seduced. It's to achieve in your career, to get to the top, to be the best in your field. Parenting is not any easier, especially with social media. The mom or dad who has it all together, the full-time job, leads the PTAs, the classroom mom or dad has dinner every day on the table at 6 every night. Anybody like that? Or is that just at my house? Only kidding. It's not at my house. And then we also have to pay attention to how our kids do at school, because that plays into our status as well. Because if our kids aren't doing well, we feel like bad parents, and we pray that nobody finds out that my kid has to have help or my kid is not doing well, because if they do, what will others think of me? We can boast about our education, our degrees, sometimes feeling like we have to let everybody know just how smart we are, letting them know when they're wrong, even for the tiniest mistakes. We can also see it in the stuff that we have, the cars that we drive, the neighborhoods that we live in, the vacations we take. All these contribute to this image that we want to project, which communicates to the people around you, I am somebody. I matter. But one of the biggest ways I think we strive for status is respect. Because we all want respect. Now, I get that maybe the things I've talked about here before, you don't care about your job. It's a job. You get it for a paycheck. You don't compare with other families. That's great. But I think at our core, at our root, all of us want respect. We desire that because we don't want disrespect. And for some of us in this culture, it's not a problem, because we have the right education, we speak the right language, our skin color is right, and we don't have to worry about it. But one of the things, as we were talking this week in our message community, talking about today, is how some people come to this country and don't automatically get that respect because they don't talk the same way we do, they don't look the same way we do. And in their home countries, they had advanced degrees, and they were from prestigious universities in their home countries, but they come here and those degrees aren't recognized. And they had top jobs in their fields back in their home countries, but they come here to be a janitor because there's no respect for them. But we all desire respect. But there's some problems with trying to achieve status that are inherent, that just come with it. And the first one is just this: it's a never-ending pursuit. Do you realize that there is always somebody younger, somebody prettier, somebody smarter, somebody more driven than you, just waiting to knock you down off your status? And what we find is that chasing this status becomes a never-ending pursuit. It's never-ending. And because of that, it means we have to focus on ourselves a lot. We have to focus on ourselves and what we can do to get what we want and get everything we think we're supposed to get out of life. Everything in life becomes a tool to help you get what you want. You're really not committed to your job because it's just a stepping stone. And you love your family and you're glad you have them, but let's just be real. They're just an Instagram photo sometimes to make that image look right for what we're supposed to put out there. When we chase after status, we see others as objects to be used or obstacles to be overcome. That's what happens. There's nothing else why else do you exist? To help me get what I want. Because there's somewhere I need to be, and I'm going to get there with you or without you. And I think the most significant problem is when you take those first three things and you wrap them together, and you find that if you live chasing that all the time, you have nothing but fear and anxiety. Fear and anxiety. Because there is somebody always right on your heels. There's always the danger that you're not going to be recognized, or that someone somewhere may not elevate you the way you think you should be, or respect you the way you think you should be. And so we work harder because we have to protect it, to keep up that perfect image. You worry about status when you feel like you've got something to prove, or you feel like you want somebody to notice you. And when we think status equals importance, and when we think status equals power or influence, what chasing status, what it really shows us is our own insecurity. It shows us that there's a hole, there's something unfulfilled in our hearts that we're chasing after, that we hope somebody or something will feel and come back and make us okay. But that insecurity will continue to sit there if we don't address it. So what can we do to combat this? What do we do to overcome the seduction of status? Well, I think we first need to acknowledge that we live in a culture where your status is a high priority, where people around you expect you to tell them how great you are, and you're expected to move forward, and you're expected to have drive, and you're expected to be moving up the ladder. You know, why else would our airwaves be covered with shows like Keeping Up with the Kardashians and The Real Housewives of whatever, wherever, Des Moines, you know? Why would so many companies pay influencers? Do you guys know what influencers are? Just for those that may not know, there could be a few in the crowd. Influencers are individuals that are paid by companies to post on social media. And these are individuals that usually have a large following. They have YouTube channels, they have Instagram feeds, and they are paid by companies to wear their clothes or their makeup or their jewelry or whatever, or to promote their products. And companies pay these people big money, and they're called influencers. Why do they do that? Because they know there are people out there watching these influencers that are going, well, Luke wears this, I'm going to wear that. Or Amy's got that makeup, I want that lipstick too. And that influencer does exactly what they're supposed to do. They influence people to go towards those products. But we have to realize that even though the world is continuing, the culture around us is continuing to push us and say, go higher, go farther, go faster, that upward mobility, we have to realize there's a better way. But we have to come to peace with the better way may not put you on the list of top professionals, young professionals in Des Moines. You may not make the Parents 100 list of top moms and dads. In fact, we have to come to peace with that. It may be much different than what the world tells us where peace and satisfaction come from. You see, we have to change the world's value, change out the world's value of upward mobility with a kingdom value, with the Jesus value of downward mobility in humble service. You see, when others tell us that the real value is moving up the ladder, Jesus tells us it's by going low. And when the culture says to make a name for yourself, Jesus actually says make yourself nothing. I don't know that we could find any more polar opposites between the drive of what the world tells us and what Jesus is saying. There just can't exist. You see what John was saying? You can't go both directions. You can't try to push yourself upward and go low at the same time. It just doesn't work. You see, there are multiple places we could have gone to look at the words of Jesus to talk about this. We could look at Matthew 20:16. Jesus says, he's telling a story, and at the end of the story, he says, so the first will be last, and the last will be first. And then in Matthew 23, he's speaking to a crowd, and he says to them, he says, for those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. In Mark chapter 10, you have this story, which is very fascinating, where two of Jesus' disciples, they're fighting. They're fighting, and they come to Jesus, and they're like, Jesus, we have a question for you. Like Jesus is some genie in a bottle that they've rubbed and, get to make a wish. And Jesus is like entertaining this thought, and he's like, well, what do you want? And they say, when you go to heaven, we want to sit on the side of you. We want one of us on the right and one of us on the left so that we can sit next to you. Now, what they were asking for is we want the seats of honor. In heaven, in the kingdom to come, we want to be right there next to you because we don't want there to be anybody above us other than you. We're good with you being above us, Jesus, but nobody else. Well, you remember Jesus had 12 disciples, And when the other 10 heard what these 2 had done, they weren't too happy about it. It creates this conflict among the disciples, and Jesus kind of has to step into this. And he says to them, he says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and the high officials exercise authority over them. Not so among you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. And we could stop right there. And we could look at all the different times Jesus taught this. And you could even look at Jesus' life and what he says right here. He made the ultimate sacrifice, became the ultimate servant by laying his life down on the cross. But there's an interesting picture. Jesus does something really incredible in a moment with his disciples that I want us to look at today. And in this moment, even before the cross, he's showing his disciples this incredible truth that the solution for the seduction of status is humble service. That's what Jesus is saying. You see, when you look at John chapter 13, there's this incredible story. It's right before Jesus is going to be betrayed. It's right before he's going to be crucified. He's with his disciples. They're in the upper room, and they're going to eat the Last Supper together. These guys have been walking that day, and thinking about the culture as they would walk, they wore sandals. The streets weren't paved. It was dusty, and so their feet would have been nasty. And so when you went into a home, it was customary for the host to have water and a basin next to the door. And a couple of things could happen. Either you could kind of wash your feet as you walked in, or the host would have a servant, a slave there to wash your feet for you. But this wasn't just any slave, because this was the most menial task, the most demeaning thing a person could done. They wouldn't even have their Jewish slaves do it. They reserved that for the people they thought as worse than slaves, which was the Gentiles. So they'd have their Gentile slaves do this. This was as low as you could possibly go. So on this evening, as they're getting ready to observe the Last Supper, we read in John chapter 13 that Jesus and his disciples, they walk into the room, and they go sit at the table, and everybody's sitting down. And remember, they're not sitting at a table like we would. They're kind of reclining. You kind of lean, and your feet are back a little bit, but you're kind of leaning in towards the table on the pillows that you're sitting on. And in that moment, as Jesus is there, and they're probably talking about their day and everything, Jesus just gets up. And he walks over to the basin and the water, and he ties a towel around his waist. And one by one, he begins to go to his disciples and wash their feet. He does something that the lowest of the low would typically do. Now, it's a beautiful picture. As I said, it's in John chapter 13. When he comes to Peter, Peter objects. He says, "Don't do this, Jesus. Don't wash me." And Jesus says, "I have to do this. If I don't, you're not a part of me." And then Peter makes a crazy statement. He says, "Well, then just give me a whole bath," basically. And Jesus says, "You've had a bath. You don't need a full bath. You just need your feet washed." And then at the end of this, it says when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and he returned to his place. And he says to them, "Do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that's what I am." And let me just tell you, the idea of a teacher stooping to the position to wash his disciples' feet was just unheard of, not something that happened. He says, "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you go and do them." You see, I think it's easy in this moment to gloss over what's going on here, the significance of what he's done. As I said, this wasn't something Jesus should have done. It was the lowliest job, but he did it. And what we miss in some of this story is that you have to kind of think about the details, is because as each of these disciples enter this room, each of them walk by that basin, each of them walk by that water jar, and one by one, each of them refuse to pick it up. No one stops, no one considers washing their feet. They all sit down to eat. And I get it, they're probably hungry. But it's not surprising either, because it was just right before this that they were fighting over who would get to sit next to Jesus. You see, they saw a need, they knew it needed to be done, but not one of them was willing to do it. It would be below their status. it would be beneath them. You see, Jesus knew his time was short with his disciples, so he did what needed to be done, the unheard of. He's modeling for them what he's been trying to tell them all along. You see, there's always going to be a pull. There's always going to be a tug to an enticement to elevate yourself, to want to see a seat at the head of the table, to grab those positions of power. But true service doesn't come, or true status doesn't come from positions of power. It comes when we serve one another. How was Jesus able to do this? You see, I think in that moment, the way Brent would have responded, I would have looked at Peter or somebody and I'd been like, "What's up, dude? Wash my feet." "Oh, sure, Jesus, I will." But that's not what happened. That's not what happened. How was Jesus able to do this? He was God in the flesh, so that helped. But the question I think we have to ask is, do you have to be Jesus in order to make this happen? And I don't think so, because I think as we look at what Jesus did, he shows us some incredible principles that can help us resist the allure of status. And it begins with this. We're going to look at some verses I didn't read, but we're going to go back and pick them up. John chapter 13, verse 3. Listen to this. It says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and he was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothes, and wrapped the towel around his waist. Do you see what I saw there? Jesus was able to humbly serve because he knew who he was. If you were here last week, we did an entire message on identity. We talked about the value and the power in knowing who you are and that you are a child of God. You see, Jesus had no problem picking up a towel because it didn't diminish who he was at all. It didn't rock his world. It didn't change anything. He didn't care what these 12 guys thought about him because he knew who he was. And that is powerful. You see, we struggle with that sometimes. We won't let go of status. We want to elevate ourselves because we're afraid of what people might think of us. And Jesus didn't have to prove anything to anybody. He knew who he was. And it didn't matter how it made him look to wash their feet. Not only did Jesus know who he was, but he also knew his purpose in life. He knew what he was put on this earth to do. And he knew that by humbling himself to serve somebody else, it wouldn't change that purpose or it wouldn't put it in jeopardy at all. He was able to do it. And when we understand why we are here, we don't have to be constantly elbowing for position. Knowing you are doing what God has called you to do brings you incredible freedom to do things that other people will scoff at, that other people look down their nose at. But Jesus looks at and says, I elevate. When we know who we are and we know why we're here, it gives us that freedom to do things nobody else will. We also see that humble service will only happen if we open our eyes and respond. You see, all of them had walked in. All of them knew their feet were dirty. This was customary to wash the feet. There was a need. The feet needed to be washed, and Jesus saw it, and he didn't ignore it. He didn't think this is somebody else's job. He didn't look and say, Peter, get this done. He actively stepped up and served. And when we do the same, when we actively see the need and we respond, we are doing something. We're actively resisting the seduction that keeps whispering in your ear, you're better than this. This is beneath you. You're too educated, too wealthy, too powerful. You see, we have a choice. We can either choose to avoid or we can choose to act. How do you respond when you see a need? Do you respond by saying, yes, I'll step in, or do you respond by going, oh, that's not my job? I think there's another thing we see here because we read here that there will be objectors and critics. Even Jesus had his, so don't think you're exempt. We all have it. There will be times when you humbly serve, and it goes against our cultural norms. And when you're told to promote yourself, to follow the influencers, to stand up and be noticed, there's going to be people that look at you and say, why are you doing this? You are crazy. You're better than this. Don't stoop to this level. When we go against what cultural norms say, people will not like it, and they will tell you about it. They did it to Jesus, they'll do it to you. I think there's something else we see here in Jesus is this right here, is that you cannot do this from afar. This was a dirty job. I am not a foot person. Anybody, In the Clark house, Carrie loves to have her feet rubbed. I'm not the one to do it. I don't like feet. That wasn't part of the wedding vow, so I think I'm safe. But she loves lotion on her feet and somebody to take one of them little scrubber things. Don't touch my feet. Don't touch. I'm ticklish, first off. I don't like my feet being touched. It makes me laugh. But I don't like feet. But the only way you are going to step into something and humbly serve is by getting your hands dirty. You can't do it from far away. And here's something else, because a lot of people, I think, in our culture would look at it and say, well, do something. Post something online. Awesome. Thanks for the 3 seconds it took you to stand up and say, I'm against this. That's not acting. That's not humble service. It goes beyond posting something online. It's actually standing up and doing something. In Jesus' case, it was getting on his hands and his knees and touching those nasty feet and pouring water over them and drying them off. And some of us need to learn to humbly serve by getting our hands dirty, getting on our knees, getting down into the dirt. You know that when we start working with other people, when we get involved with other people, when you get involved with me, it is not nice and tidy and neat. We are messy people. And if we're going to serve one another, it's going to cause us to get messy as well. We're not going to be able to wear the white clothes and expect no mud to be slung on us. It's going to happen. Take up the towel and the basin. Do what is needed. And the last thing I want us to see here is just simply this. It's in verse 1. It says this. It says, it was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave the world and go to the Father. And then this last part says, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. You see, there's a choice here of who we're going to love more. We're going to love ourselves more. We're going to love the world more. We're going to love others more to be able to willingly serve them. Fortunately for us, Jesus loved us and was willing to come and offer his life. All of this has got to be driven by love. If you see people as stepping stones, you're never going to love them. You're never going to serve them. Love has to be the drive to pick up the water and the towel to wash somebody's feet. Now, I know sometimes we're talking a lot about status, and for many of us, it's like, that's not me. I'm not driven by that. I am. I always have been, unfortunately. It's a temptation in my life. I was a senior vice president of a bank in my early 30s, and I was quite proud of that fact. I had most of the bank that reported to me. I was proud of that fact. I found my status to be something to be looked at. If I hadn't come to Ashworth, I'm confident I would have been in Arkansas Business Journal's top 40 under 40. But I came to Iowa instead. It's an allure. I want respect. I want people to look up to me. But I know that that seduction is there for me. And I know that I have to push back against it. Because when we strive for status, what we're hoping for is respect, control, happiness, peace, and notoriety. And we think if we get that, we'll finally have what we've desired our whole lives. But Jesus modeled for us, and he taught us repeatedly that you'll never find those things when you elevate yourselves. And even though it completely goes against everything we think or feel or believe, we will only find those things when we humbly submit ourselves to God and to one another in service. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6, written by the guy who objected to Jesus washing his feet, he writes, he says, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. See, I want you to know, though, it's not sinful to want to be successful in your career. Ambition is not necessarily a bad thing. But the question is, are you finding your identity in those things? Are you finding your identity in your status that you're chasing, or do you find it in Jesus? And here's a good way to find out. If your job that you have today was completely taken away from you, how would you feel? Would that rock your world? Or would you be like, oh, fine, I'll go find something else to do? Moms and dads, what about your parenting status? What if one of your kids really messed up, dropped out of school, ran away, didn't look like the perfect home anymore? See, we think we don't find our status in our parenting skills, but what happens when our kids don't measure up? That's telling, right? If we think, oh, well, we're just going to keep going, I'm going to love them, and we're going to keep doing what we need to do. Or if we go, oh, I've got to fix this, I've got to post the pictures, I've got to make sure nobody knows. Whew, now that's a stepping on toes right there, isn't it? The secrecy that comes from trying to keep a status that may or may not be real anymore. You see, if something happens to you or your family or your job or whatever that threatens your status and lowers you in the eyes of others, are you willing to share that? Or are you keeping that to yourself because you're afraid of what other people might think? You see, when we answer that question, it tells us whether or not we really struggle with the seduction of status. And what Jesus is saying is that it's a fool's chase. It is a fool's chase because you can chase it your entire life and you'll find you've missed everything. Because it's only when we go low, when we begin to serve one another, that we truly find that we are elevated where it really counts and where it really matters, and that's in the eyes of our Savior. So this morning, I just want to challenge you. What are you finding your status in? What are you seeking your significance in? Are you chasing those influencers, that power or position? Are you serving as Jesus did? I'm hoping this morning that we'll make active steps this week to pursue downward mobility. Not looking how to build ourselves up, but looking for ways to humbly serve others.